hate to say it, not that it's dead ends to everybody, but that, just to be able to say, here it is, that's it, there's no denying it. And because people could always argue with the evidence, right?
Well, yeah, the big problem is, and again, I have to repeat myself from earlier. First off, this is something that I wouldn't have gotten into at all. I just wouldn't have touched it. I didn't need it. I wouldn't have touched this with a 50-foot pole, until I started looking at these extraordinary events. Again, the loss of all the money, the gold, the changes of government almost at a given point in time. You got to remember 1983 that we were talking about. That may have been the time when somebody finally, a little group of scientists finally came into the White House and said, we got bad news. It looks like this thing's real and it's coming back. And the potential is this and that, and the new infrared telescopes is showing it, and what are we going to do? We can't stop it. We can't change it. Previously, we've been able to read stories about this thing as a mythical kind of a deal, that maybe it was and maybe it wasn't. That's what you're talking about. Maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't. Can you prove it? And it was always mythological almost. And there was big stories written many years ago in Look magazine and Life magazine and all these important papers at that time, and the television, and they said that it looked like there was something out there, but that don't worry about it because it's 50 or 70 years away. Well, that 50 or 70 years that they talked about back then has now passed. Okay, so now it's closer to, and from galactic measurements, our backyard. And by the way, and I touch base on a few before I finish what I was talking about, the sky disk thing. I started, because trying to cover all bases before I even dared open my mouth. I wasn't going to put my name on something that was going to just really not have a lot of proof behind it. And I'd end up looking like a jerk after a very well-respected career here for the last 30 years.
I've been there, done that.
The bottom line, and like I say now, see, this is terrible for Bob Fletcher, because if I'm wrong, okay, if I'm wrong on what all this looks like and everything, if I turn out to be wrong, well, then I'm a jerk. I'll be the fool of the year, and I can get some kind of an award or something like that for being the biggest jerk that rolled down the toilet. But if I'm right, there's not going to be anybody around to come and say, hey, good job, Bob. Boy, you were ahead of the loop on this one, like you had been on a couple other things. Well, you were right on again, and this is really, congratulations, and in a couple of weeks we're going to get wiped out. So it's like really a negative thing for myself personally. I lose no matter whether I'm right or if I'm wrong. And by the way, one thing I'm talking about being ahead of the loop. I was the one that first came out with, and matter of fact, on the floor of the United States Senate, in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee, on live C-SPAN television, I was the guy that first came out and said that we had secretly created methods by which we can alter the weather and use it as a weapon. And of course, that's one of those things also at that time. That was June of 1995 on the floor of the Senate in front of the Intelligence Committee. And I said that I was the first person to come out publicly. And of course, everybody went, "Oh God, he's crazy! Get him out of here. He's a nutball." And of course, it didn't take long before it was admitted. Well, yes, we did have it, and we were working it, and we did do it, and the Russians had it, and the Chinese have it, and they're all screwing around with it. Because we actually signed a treaty in I think it was 75, with the United Nations, at that time that said that all the powers of the world will have to guarantee each other to not use the weapons of weather control that we now have, that we will not use it against each other in a warring manner. And that's a United Nations treaty.
Right.
And I happen to have that with me at the time and all the rest of that, but that's beside the point. All right, so I was ahead of the loop on that, and I was proven to be correct. Unfortunately, if I'm correct with this one, it'll be the worst thing to have happened to humanity in the history of the Earth. Okay, so not to talk about it being, a passing thing. There have been people killed that knew about this story, and I believe had been eliminated at high levels of our government before they were allowed to come out and talk much about it at all. As I mentioned, that Dr. Harrington from the Naval Observatory in the 60s died of one of these cancers, like Ruby, the guy that killed Oswald with the Kennedy assassination. He died in 30 days with a fast-acting cancer. That was what happened with Dr. Robert Harrington when he was going to come and agreed with Dr. Sitchin that this was a reality. Now, I looked and I started wondering, I wonder what's the religious connection to this? Because this kind of stuff among the very highest level of government has got to have drifted past the Vatican. So I did due diligence on that and investigated, and guess what I found out that I was not aware of? First off, that the Vatican, of course, has had for years their own observatory at the Vatican. And a few years ago, the Vatican got cooperation and financial approval and all that kind of stuff, not that they needed any money, but they built a huge observatory in Arizona. It's owned by the Vatican. It's in Arizona. And it's interesting because it was one of the first land-based infrared telescopes.
They call it Satan, don't they?
The world. Excuse me?
Isn't it called Satan or something like that?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, the name of that telescope, which can see Nibiru because it's infrared and powerful, it's called Lucifer.
Oh, Lucifer.
Right, it's called Lucifer. How about those apples, folks? So we got the Vatican has a huge infrared telescope. So they're involved. The Vatican is involved. They know about it. They know when it's going to be coming as close as anybody else knows. They're obviously not going to say anything either. But they did come out also, a while back and said that if aliens exist, that the Vatican understands that we would have to bring them into the family of humanity, and of course they would all be God's children. They made that a while back, and they actually made a couple of statements relative to that. And we have to remember this period of time, the 83 that we were talking about, and that's about the time when they were deciding to put this telescope in Arizona, owned by the Vatican. In that period of time was when Ronald Reagan made that famous speech on the floor of the United Nations, when he said that how he wondered if all the people of the world would come together if we had to all fight off an intergalactic, an interterrestrial kind of a problem, if it was to come upon us, that was an alien of some sort. And he didn't necessarily mean alien people, although maybe he did. But he was talking about Nibiru and its relationship as being an intergalactic type of a problem that we may have to face. That was 83, that same period of time that we were talking about. Now, let me get back to this extraordinarily interesting thing called the sky disk.
Okay.
In 1999, there was a discovery that was made in Germany at an archaeological site. Now, there was in Germany 1,000 years before Christ, BC. There was what actually was a star-gazing location built very much like the Stonehenge. It is a circular location where apparently during the Bronze Age, 3,000 years ago, they were watching the stars and they were keeping track of all the goings-on in the heavens and all of that. It's an extraordinary archaeological discovery. And at that site, they discovered, actually, they caught a couple of grave robbers, if you will, that were trying to sell this particular item that had been dug up at the location of this particular site in Germany. And it was given a name, the Sky Disk. And this was a Bronze Age piece of bronze. It's like the equivalent of a shield, so to speak. It's about 14 inches, 12.5 to 14 inches across. And it is a complete layout in bronze and highlighted in pure gold, well, or as pure as it could have been at that time, gold inlay. And it shows and describes the actual crossing of Nibiru, causing a solar eclipse in the morning, and and also shows several other galactic structures and setups of the stars, of where they were located and all of that. All of the locations of the stars had been put into a modern computer, and it was able to give an exact date to indicate that it was, in fact, 3,600 years old when it was created. And it's the equivalent of what I would call like a drawing, a sketch drawing, if you will, of the event that took place. And it was a 3-hour eclipse of the sun by a giant physical body that they did not obviously know what it was. And it passed in front of the sun, between Earth and the sun. It blacked it out. Now, the reason with the brand new computerization now, if you take the locations of all the stars and the galaxies, the planets, and the planets that are indicated on the plate, you take that and feed it into a computer program we have now, it will give you the exact date, exactly right. As a matter of fact, in this case, down to the fact that it was 8:30 in the morning when the event took place, and it was 3,600 years ago. And the metal of the object itself has been verified, and also it indicates, which is very interesting, it indicates one of the the structures that's indicated on the plate itself. I'm going to try to see if I look this up so I could be a little more accurate on this.
Okay, and I just put the link to your website in one of our chat rooms so people can go over and look at the photos.
You can go that way. And I've got all of this down, of course, in the DVD. All of this is completely down in there. But the point is that one of the structures on the plate would not have been seen normally from Germany. And in order for it to have been seen that afternoon when the sun was blacked out and the stars would appear, in order to be seen, it meant that the Earth itself had been completely shifted about 26 degrees on the axis. All right, and so that meant that part of the effects of this gigantic planet passing through actually tilted the Earth on its axis by 26 degrees. And that's, again, verifiable with the modern computerization of the location of all of the stars in the sky. So there we have an extraordinary little piece that you add that to all of the written material of the Bibles and all the rest of that. It would appear that Nibiru may return. Well, let me back up on this. It appears that if it passes close by again soon, that it will first be seen in the sky as a new star. It will, of course, obviously at first appear just as one singular star moving, okay? If you watch it night after night, you could see that it was coming closer. And it would get bigger over the next couple of months. It's anticipated it would be seen in December of the year that it returns. It will be seen in December. It is anticipated because of previous writings of when the originally came by and caused all of its havoc previously, that it was done in April and May, the time of religiously from the time of Passover. So the first of it would be seen as a star in December, and then you would have January, February, March. It would be getting bigger, and then April and May would be the period of time most likely that it would pass closest between the Earth and the Sun. It would go around the Sun and go back out the other side, completing its orbit, and head towards outer space. Now, the question is, the big question between people that agree that this probably is going to happen, there are a lot of little things. There's changes in calendars. You know, they've gone through 3,000 years of calendar adjustments, and also there's a difference between the Chinese calendar and the Roman calendar and the English calendar, et cetera, et cetera. So that makes a difference. The time period of 3,000 years, obviously there are a lot of variables to affect things that way. But the consensus turns out to be this. It will be seen in December and then pass close by April or May of whatever year it is that this is coming in. Many people believe that the most likely time would be this December or the next December. Less likely would be another year or two away. So the concern is of people that have been studying this besides myself, and I'm actually studying many other people's work on this. The opinion is that it may be seen this December. If it is not seen this December as a new star headed inward, December, January, February, then we have probably another year to bite our fingernails, because the belief is it'd be between the April and May of 2015 or April and May 2016. And that's the next, within the next 3 years is what we're talking. Now, as far as the ramifications of this thing, again, you know, you're looking at the loss of potentially loss of all power. You know, if we lose, even if there's a solar activity, if we have one solar flare big enough to punch through one of the very large holes that we now have in our protective magnetosphere, which usually keeps all that stuff out from Earth. If we have one good solar flare that punches its way through, it shuts down the power because of this thing, then the power is all going to be off, and it'll be off for, even if that was the only thing that happened, the power could be off for 5 years, 10 years. All right. The other things, of course, is the worst of it's going to be the meteor showers, which would be unbelievable. And then the thing that I haven't spoken about at all yet, which would be actually starting pretty early in the transition of this thing, would be the dragging the oceans like Noah's floods, dragging the oceans right out of the seabeds. You have to remember, the moon is what drags our tides, drags the oceans in and out 10, 15, 30 feet every day, in and out as the tides go. That's gravitation of the moon, and of course the sun's gravity also. But if you can imagine something with the power of 1,000 beyond that, it literally will drag the oceans out of the seabeds and wash over every single coastline. We have 140 million people that live on the coastline around the globe that will probably be drowned in 30 minutes of the passing of this thing. So it's really serious stuff. I have no way other than to supply the information that I do have and the potentials. See, now we always get back. I have to go back and say, if somebody can come up with a good reason of where the gold is gone, why we have built 103 underground facilities, why we have dates for the last couple of years that have become imperative on when the dried foods were delivered to these underground locations, why we are spending money for riot control, supplying the police forces with military armament of all sorts, and why we are spending millions, actually billions of dollars on weapons and bullets and machine guns for all of the bureaucratic offices around the United States. If somebody can give us a good reason for all of those things, then you may have a good argument. But the problem with this is that worldwide, the leaders of every major nation in the world are scared to death of an event that is on its way in. And it appears the only logical answer to that is the planet Nibiru, Planet X, that has been talked about for decades and decades.
Yeah. Yeah. So now I'm looking on your website here, and I'm looking at some of the pictures. And well, you know,
it's all very limited, but go ahead.
Yeah. Now I'm looking at some of the pictures, and I'd have to ask. Now, this is what my problem has been in finding pictures and finding real videos. My problem has been is that I could never prove that somebody didn't doctor the picture.
Well, yeah. No, there's no question about that. But there's no question about that. Unfortunately, at this point in time, you know, people can put together phony pictures. That's for sure.
But now those underground bases, now that's another story.
Yeah. See, here's the point. You can always just say, well, and I got to be honest with you. The only good pictures that I really feel that we have at this point in time is that the one picture, and I have that on my website, is where it shows the 5 moons around the red centerpiece. All right, that picture is the one that was originally put out accidentally by NASA. And then, of course, boom, that disappeared as quick as it could, but it was too late because it was out there. The other problem was, in fact, that there's a picture. Actually, there's a photograph that Marshall, can't think of his last name. Excuse me. I can't think of his name. Anyhow, the gentleman's been doing it for a longer time than I have in terms of studying some of this stuff. That he had contracted apparently with a telescope and has been taking progressive shots aimed out at where we are pretty sure it is located, and it is getting bigger and closer. And that's been actually this fellow used to work for CNN, and he got off a couple of years ago and started getting into this when he found out things that he wasn't supposed to find out about at CNN. But the other good picture that is really was a shocking event. Originally, NASA had a setup with one of the new infrared telescopes that was floating out there, intentionally put out to find Nibiru, and it located it, and there was up on the program that you can go up and see the outer space, but you can also look up your neighbor's backyard and all the rest of that. That actually had a great picture for a few days, and it also gave the latitude and longitude in space where people could go out and you could dial it up yourself and look at it. And what they did when a couple of people saw it, and they said, that's Nibiru, it fits everything on Nibiru, and people started copying it onto the YouTube. This NASA went out and they blocked off on the space program, their own Google Space, on the Google Space program, they blocked off a section in outer space. It's just a big black square now. So if you go and try to look it up, all you see is like somebody's holding a postcard up in front of your telescope or something. So why would they do that if they just didn't want people to see that and know exactly where it's located? It's like really goofy. The bottom line is, here's what happens. If you just say, okay, we don't have any good pictures yet, it's not in close enough yet, we can't, unless you have an extraordinary telescope with infrared and it's floating a few thousand miles out in space. Now, if you've got that, well, then go ahead and get your pictures. But if we had just said, all right, Bob, there are no good pictures as of today, then I would say, okay, that's fine. I agree. Let's just put that aside. All right? Now, explain all the rest of what I've gone over this evening. See, you can't do it. You can't tell me where the money and the gold went. You can't tell me why they built 103 of these underground facilities. Why did Russia build 5,000 of them? Why is Red China moving all of their airplanes, missiles, rockets, and everything you can imagine underground? They have 3,000 rockets and underground in tunnels being saved away. Why are they doing that? And if you go through all the rest, why did they do the seed vault? Why did they do a seed vault and particularly save all the seeds of the world so that we can replant the earth? Why did they do that? Why did they stop stealing everything and putting it in underground instead of in their pockets? And if you can answer that, hey, that's good. And I will be very happy, because it would be nothing better than for myself to be wrong on what I'm doing. In other words, just to be in error on 5,000 different things that's going on, and looking at them all incorrectly. But that's what's happening.
You can also ask why so many underground facilities, and we're not talking about just shelters here. We're talking about the literal, like, cities below ground.
Oh yeah, no, they're gigantic. And I have now, and I have to repeat this now. My DVD that explains all of this took me 3 years to put this thing together. It's extraordinarily in total. It covers everything, starting way back when and coming up to last month. Okay? It's 4 hours long. It's 2 DVDs. It explains all of it. And it has the pictures, moving pictures, underground facility moving pictures. It explains the levitation trains that they have inside. I have up on my website I think it's up now, the list of all 103 locations of all of the facilities. I have the pictures inside the facilities. We have all of that in there. It's a 4-hour DVD. It's $24.95 as long as I'm able to still get the thing out. I got plenty on hand. But I will say this. I did the Coast to Coast George Norrie program last week, and we had over 1,800 hits in 1 day and a half. It actually shut me down for a little bit on my site. It was unbelievable. We had a hit every 2 minutes for 24 hours. So all I can tell you is everything is there. Everything's on the DVD. If you're interested in it all, I beg you to get it so that you will be ahead of the loop. And I don't know what else I can say. When I finally came to the conclusion that there was no other answer other than the fact that this thing is coming back in, we will never be told. Here's what's going to happen now. This is the rest of it. And by the way, on my DVD, which I completed 6 months ago maybe, in terms of finally putting it into production, I point out that what is going to have to be used by the people in government is a false flag of some type of a national emergency. They have to have the national emergency in hand, in place in the United States of America without telling people about Nibiru coming in. And I put in there, I predicted this because it was an analogy. It's not some kind of a psychic prediction. This is logical prediction of an investigator for 30 years. They will have to use some major event like a thing called Ebola to do the national emergency, or a terrorist event from a group called ISIS to do the national emergency.
I think they're going to do both.
Or a war breaking out with Russia pushing itself too far, or something else with the Red Chinese. Now, that tape, that DVD that I completed now, was done a while back before I was proven to be right on the fact that Ebola is on its way to being a national emergency. Now, once they do that national emergency, then it's in place. Whether they ever say anything about the planet X Nibiru coming back or not, it's not going to make a difference, because by the time people find out about it, it'll already be under martial law in the United States of America. The Constitution is automatically suspended. That paperwork's been signed by, actually been signed by every president for the last 7 or 8 or 10, as far as that's concerned. But Obama signed the update on it several months ago with the ability to do that, suspend the Constitution, national emergency for whatever reason. It will not be Nibiru, because he cannot tell the people. It's one thing to tell people they can't go out of their house because of a germ, as opposed to saying we got martial law because the globe is going to be bombarded with meteorites and flooded across every single coastline on the globe. You will never hear them announce that until it's too late. Period. You will see it. You will be able to go out and see it in your backyard before they ever announce it. But it's going to be, we will be in martial law before that time. And of course, I knew nothing 6 months ago finishing up this DVD. I knew what it was going to be, but I did not know that it was going to end up being Ebola. And it looks like that damn well might be what they use.
Yeah, you know, and I've been saying this too, that this, I've got good friends who have done great work on this, Dr. Horowitz being one of them, with Ebola.
Sure.
And it's a bioweapon. and it's going to be used. It is being used for one for still fear in people, and for another will be for forced vaccinations, which God knows what they'll actually
yeah. But it's going way beyond that. See, if you didn't know, if you knew nothing at all about the potential of the Nibiru problem, if you didn't know anything about that, see, then you'd be watching and say, well, this might be a phony thing. You know, I believe the AIDS, the same as Dr. Horowitz, I believe the AIDS, as a matter of fact, I found the congressional record where the scientists requested the funding of $10 million to create AIDS on the floor of the Congress. I've got that. I came out with that 15 years ago, 17 years ago. You know, there's no question in my mind that the AIDS thing was synthetic and was created and introduced into the homosexual community, and then went from there.
And they created cancer viruses as well. They were looking for a vaccine for cancers, and they wound up stumbling upon a virus that they could actually inject in people.
Sure, and see now here we get back to the same question. So if you can question, you can say, well, gee, you know, I'm not sure about this Planet X, and we don't know about the pictures, and they could be real or they could be phony, and you know, when it's really vivid to everybody, you know, then obviously it's too late. You can put that same question always back, even on what we were just talking about. You can, you know, I found the paperwork where the guy actually asked for the money to do it, to create a weapon that would be a non-curable immunizational defect, and that they could come up with it and nothing would be able to stop it. That was the AIDS virus. Now, I can't, beyond that, I don't have any motion pictures. I don't have the confessions of the guy that did it. We're never going to get the confessions of how they introduced it through the World Health Organization or any of that. You know, that's the same question you can ask today about Nibiru. All I've done is put all the facts together. And then again, if somebody can show me a good reason for all the rest of that stuff that's out there, and then convince me that it's not because there's a galactic surprise coming in from left field, you know, I would love to have somebody prove that to be wrong, but they can't do it. Nobody can make sense out of 103 facilities, buying all. You know, a couple of years ago, when people were trying to buy, when wholesalers were trying to get the dry foods for survivalists, they couldn't get their orders filled because the government for 2 years was buying 95% of everything was produced. What's wrong with that picture, folks? Where do you think they're going with it?
Look at all the ammo they purchased also.
Yeah, right. Why are they doing that? See? Why are they doing it? I'm going to tell you why they're doing it. They're going to do it because when the stuff hits the fan, they're going to have to shoot American citizens in the street that are going to be going crazy rioting because they need food and water and every other thing to try to protect themselves. And the government, they're going to be gone, sports fans. And if you even get a notice, if you get a my dear fellow American speech from the president relative to this, which I don't think you're ever going to see it. I don't think they're ever going to come out and say, uh-oh, sorry about that, surprise, there's a thing coming in next month. That's not going to happen. And if it does, when you see that, those guys are all going to be vanished underground already, and it's going to be a pre-recorded disc punched up into some kind of a system. But you got to remember this also. All of the networks, all communications, all electronics, all of that is going to be gone at some point in time as this thing comes in closer. And once that happens, and the electronics and the satellites are all fried, all the generators are fried, and all of that's gone, then there's not going to be any communication. You won't know if your neighbor's still alive, and that's the way it's going to be. we don't realize how unbelievably dependent we are. You know, it took down in New Orleans, it took, I think it was 4 hours once they started rioting. Everything in every grocery store, when they had that bad hurricane down there, was gone from the shelves in 4 hours. And they started shooting people in about 2 days once they realized how bad that hurricane was down there, and the power was out, and the police couldn't even communicate. They were shooting people in the streets.
I see, and we've got a call, Bob. 208 area code. You're on Late Night in the Midlands. First name and where you're calling from, please.
Hey, Michael, it's Andrew.
Yeah.
I'm actually in the Midwest right now. The phone number is...
Yeah, goodbye to you. Sorry about that. Not falling for it, buddy. And we just lost our guest. Isn't that amazing when Eugene Sonny Irving, the troll, the CIA boy toy, calls into the show and I lose my guest? How about that? Bob, is that you?
No, it's Andrew again.
Oh, okay. Yeah, all right. Well, okay, folks. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get my guest back on the line here. Hold on a second. Well, I'm trying to avoid going to a break, so you'll have to bear with me. That was kind of strange. I don't know what was going on there, but I recognized the number that was calling in, and then all of a sudden my guest dropped off. Let's see. All right, folks, 1 second here. I'm dialing it up. I don't have a screener. I do things on my own. Hello, Bob?
Yep, you're back on?
Yeah, we lost you. I had a call was coming in, then we had another call coming in. I recognized the number to one of them, and not a nice person.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's neither here nor there. We lost somebody maybe we didn't need.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a good question? Is there a question that you can repeat, or where are we at?
Well, no, you were explaining. We were talking about the underground facilities and all the things that they're doing. And, you know, good luck to anybody explaining why they're doing these things outside of...
The problem is, again, and by the way, for those people that, and I mention this only because I'm not necessarily a follower of this, but it was something that came across my desk and I realized how amazing it was. But, you know, Nostradamus, in his predictions of different things, there's some people strong believers in that stuff, some people don't believe in it at all. If you only had that to depend on, I wouldn't want to even talk to anybody about it. But Nostradamus talks about this in several of his predictions. Also, there's, are you familiar with the English, I don't know what she was exactly, I guess you just call her maybe a psychic, I'm not sure, but Mother Shipton. Are you familiar with Mother Shipton from the England in the 1400s?
Is this the one that had some secrets from the church? Mother Shipton had visions, you know, psychic vision, whatever you want to call it, the same as Nostradamus. But she was the same as Nostradamus, extraordinarily right on. She was in around the late 1400s, early 1500s. She died in 1550, but she was English, so it was not where you had to try to decipher, you know, old Latin or English, Italian, or any of the other ancient languages, so to speak. She did it regular old English, like she was from New York City, and she talks about it exactly right on. And not only that, but she predicted ships, submarines, the computer system, the internet, the automobile, all of those things.
And so she obviously was amazingly right on. But she described the incoming of this this planet coming by with a huge tail and creating all the floods and meteors and all the rest of that, everything exactly the same as in the Bible. And of course the Bible describes it. They call it in the Bible, they call it the wormwood. And again, I mentioned the Chinese. They talked about it as a visiting planet and the dragon with the long tail, and they complete descriptions of all of it. And again, the point that's interesting or bothering right now is the fact that the Earth is already being affected. The ice is, the glaciers are all receding already. The water's going up already around the coastline. I'm going to tell you something that's under everybody's nose, and a lot of people are missing it. A few months ago in Miami, Florida, they spent millions and millions of dollars installing pumps because the high tide in Miami now goes in as far as 6 blocks into the city of Miami Beach. So what has happened there is the tides at the coastline in Miami, Florida are already affected to the extent that they have to put millions of dollars worth of special pumping systems to pump the water every day when they have high tides to keep it out of the city of Miami Beach. A lot of people don't know it. It's right there. Find out about it. I happen to have a son that still lives in Miami, and that's a fact, period. Again, that's something you can look up. The glaciers are melting like crazy. That increases the water line on the entire globe. The volcanoes I was talking about, 35, 45 of them right today are erupting. Earthquakes, they're happening all over the place. The crazy weather, just in general, the crazy weather is destroying America. We still have, we have a drought. We have a drought in California, the worst that they've had since the Dust Bowl.
Yeah.
And it's been a year. They got places that haven't had rain of any measurable amount in a year in the California area. So all of these things are, in my opinion, a long-distance effect of the Planet X and Nibiru. And I've come up with something also that I refer to as the bowling ball effect with this planet. And what it is, that when it comes back in, which it has started to do, obviously, when it comes back, it's not only does it have its 5 moons and its own itself and its 5 moons, and then all that junk that's pulling behind it in some serious manner, as it comes back, its gravitational force field and the physical effects of smashing through existing groups of meteors and asteroids and all of those things that normally are just floating around out there not bothering anybody. It's like a bowling ball effect going into the pins. And this is striking through all of this stuff in the numbers would obviously be trillions and multi-billions, and it's hitting this stuff and pushing it with its own gravitational effect and going through it and knocking it off in all these multitude of directions. That is why we have this increase in meteors and asteroids and shooting stars. And what everybody remembers, was it 2 years ago now, maybe even more, when the Russians, we were watching a comet or an asteroid that was supposed to be coming around, and they were aware of it. We watched it. It was supposed to fly by Russia, and it flew by Russia, but then all of a sudden there was a big asteroid that came down that nobody saw. You see, when people say, if this Nibiru was out there, we would see it, you're not going to see it if it's coming up from behind the sun out there in space from our perspective. The angle and direction that you may be trying to view it, depending on where you are, on what time of the day, and all of that. If it comes from behind the sun, we cannot see it. And that's exactly what the answer was when everybody in the world said, how come we didn't see that? If that thing had hit more directly, it would have been like 100 atomic bombs. It's not a joke, it's serious. If it had come down and had not burned up and blew up just before it actually hit ground, it was only a small piece, small amounts of it hit the ground. If it had come in on a more direct perpendicular angle, it would have been the equivalent of 100 million atomic bombs.
True, but that's a comet. Big difference compared to the size of that planet.
That's right. The comet is like a flea compared to this planet. Yeah. The comet is like an automobile. The size of that thing was like, when it first entered in, was probably the size of a bus. And this planet that we're talking about, because it's not supposed to hit Earth. Don't mistake what I'm saying. But that planet, the planet coming around Nibiru, is 5 times the size of Earth. It's horrendous. If, in fact, it's what it is, that's how big they've calculated it. And like I said, if it comes through at a fairly close to our own ecliptic circle of orbital planets, we will pass through it. It will take, the calculations on it actually is down to about just a little less than 1 hour, real close to 1 hour, passing through the meteor storm. 50 to 60 minutes of a meteor storm. And that meteor storm will have meteors in it that are going to make that Russian thing look like a dirt ball.
Well, Bob, we're getting down to the last few minutes here, and I want to give you an opportunity to get out anything you want, any appearances you have coming up, whatever, it's okay. Go ahead and do that, and I'm going to keep you linked up on latenightinthemidlands.com, and maybe not too far down the line I could get you back, and we could do this again and talk further on this.
And at any time we may have more information, but be aware of the possibility of them calling a national emergency. And if they're calling a national emergency before December, I'm going to start making sure that, I don't know what I'm going to make sure. I'm going to do what the guy, the head of NASA, said when they asked him, what do we do when we find out something like this is coming in? And he said, pray.
Yeah.
And that was the response of the head of NASA on the floor of the Congress. I want people to go to you go to your link, go to bobfletcherinvestigations.com and order up the DVD. Get it for yourself. 4 hours. It's an entire library of information. And then I hope I'm wrong. I hope I am the biggest jerk that you have ever had on your program.
Well,
in 2 years you can have me back and let me know.
Well, yeah, I'll go with wrong, but jerk, no, because you're not telling people you better believe this. You're simply putting the information out there, and it's up to people if they want to go after it or not.
I hope. I just personally feel, number one, I don't like them lying to us and stealing our money, and that's what they've done. And if they're lying to us and stealing our money to save their own tails on something that's as earth-shaking as this event, biblical an event, if they've been doing that, that really makes me mad, and I'm positive that's what they're doing. You need to know about it. I can't give you instructions on what to do other than take a good yoga class so you can kiss your own butt goodbye when it hits the fan.
There you go. Well, Bob, thank you so much for being a guest tonight.
happen to have that with me at the time and all the rest of that, but that's beside the point. All right, so I was ahead of the loop on that, and I was proven to be correct. Unfortunately, if I'm correct with this one, it'll be the worst thing to have happened to humanity in the history of the Earth. Okay, so not to talk about it being, a passing thing. There have been people killed that knew about this story, and I believe had been eliminated at high levels of our government before they were allowed to come out and talk much about it at all. As I mentioned, that Dr. Harrington from the Naval Observatory in the 60s died of one of these cancers, like Ruby, the guy that killed Oswald with the Kennedy assassination. He died in 30 days with a fast-acting cancer. That was what happened with Dr. Robert Harrington when he was going to come and agreed with Dr. Sitchin that this was a reality. Now, I looked and I started wondering, I wonder what's the religious connection to this? Because this kind of stuff among the very highest level of government has got to have drifted past the Vatican. So I did due diligence on that and investigated, and guess what I found out that I was not aware of? First off, that the Vatican, of course, has had for years their own observatory at the Vatican. And a few years ago, the Vatican got cooperation and finance, and congratulations, and in a couple of weeks we're going to get wiped out. So it's like really a negative thing for for myself personally. I lose no matter whether I'm right or if I'm wrong. And by the way, one thing I'm talking about being ahead of the loop. I was the one that first came out with, and matter of fact, on the floor of the United States Senate, in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee, on live C-SPAN television, I was the guy that first came out and said that we had secretly created methods by which we can alter the weather and use it as a weapon. And of course, that's one of those things also at that time. That was June of 1995 on the floor of the Senate in front of the Intelligence Committee. And I said that I was the first person to come out publicly. And of course, everybody went, "Oh God, he's crazy! Get him out of here. He's a nutball." And of course, it didn't take long before it was admitted. Well, yes, we did have it, and we were working it, and we did do it, and the Russians had it, and the Chinese have it, and they're all screwing around with it. Because we actually signed a treaty in I think it was 75, with the United Nations at that time, that said that all the powers of the world will have to guarantee each other to not use the weapons of weather control that we now have, that we will not use it against each other in a warring manner. And that's a United Nations treaty.
Right.
And I
hate to say it, not that it's dead ends to everybody, but that just to be able to say, here it is, that's it, there's no denying it. And because people could always argue with the evidence, right?
Well, yeah, the big problem is, and again, I have to repeat myself from earlier. First off, this is something that I wouldn't have gotten into at all. I just wouldn't have touched it. I didn't need it. I wouldn't have touched this with a 50-foot pole, until I started looking at these extraordinary events. Again, the loss of all the money, the gold, the changes of government almost at a given point in time. You got to remember 1983 that we were talking about. That may have been the time when somebody finally, a little group of scientists finally came into the White House and said, we got bad news. It looks like this thing's real and it's coming back. And the potential is this and that, and the new infrared telescopes is showing it, and what are we going to do? We can't stop it. We can't change it. Previously, we've been able to read stories about this thing as a mythical kind of a deal, and maybe it was and maybe it wasn't. That's what you're talking about. Maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't. Can you prove it? And it was always approval and all that kind of stuff, not that they needed any money. But they built a huge observatory in Arizona. It's owned by the Vatican. It's in Arizona. And it's interesting because it was one of the first land-based infrared telescopes.
They call it Satan, don't they?
The world. Excuse me?
Isn't it called Satan or something like that?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, the name of that telescope, which can see Nibiru because it's infrared and powerful, it's called Lucifer.
Oh, Lucifer.
Right. It's called Lucifer. How about those apples, folks? So we got the Vatican has a huge infrared telescope. So they're involved. The Vatican is involved. They know about it. They know when it's going to be coming as close as anybody else knows. They're obviously not going to say anything either. But they did come out also, a while back and said that if aliens exist, that the Vatican understands that we would have to bring them into the family of humanity, and of course they would all be God's children. They made that a while back, and they actually made a couple of statements relative to that. And we have to remember this period of time, the 83 that we were talking about, and that's about the time when they were deciding to put this mythological almost. And there was big stories written many years ago in Look magazine and Life magazine and all these important papers at that time and the television. And they said that it looked like there was something out there, but that don't worry about it because it's 50 or 70 years away. Well, that 50 or 70 years that they talked about back then has now passed. Okay, so now it's closer to, and from galactic measurements, our backyard. And by the way, now, let me touch base on a few before I finish what I was talking about, the sky disk thing. I started, because trying to cover all bases before I even dared open my mouth, I wasn't going to put my name on something that was going to just really not have a lot of proof behind it. And I'd end up looking like a jerk after a very well-respected career here for the last 30 years.
I've been there, done that.
The bottom line, and like I say now, this is terrible for Bob Fletcher, because if I'm wrong, okay, if I'm wrong on what all this looks like and everything, if I turn out to be wrong, well, then I'm a jerk. I'll be the fool of the year, and I can get some kind of an award or something like that for being the biggest jerk that rolled down the toilet. But if I'm right, there's not going to be anybody around to come and say, hey, good job, Bob. Boy, you were ahead of the loop on this one, like you had been on a couple other things. Boy, you were right on again, and this is really